Hey guys, have you ever heard of a Japanese treatment called Epipharyngeal Abrasive Therapy? I hope I'm saying that right. I've never heard of it, and I'm definitely intrigued and excited to learn more about it right now. My guest today, Neal, used it on top of a recovery program that he signed up for that was incredibly effective for him, a program that we will dive deep into during this video here. And this all changed his life. Hello, everyone. I'm Raelan. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we dive into recovery stories from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID because we're seeing significant overlap between these two conditions. And I'm excited to introduce you to Neal Cotter over in Los Angeles here in the US and dive into his journey and the innovative methods that he used to recover. And I am lacking the words to express how excited I am that Neal's recovery journey, along with all the other recovery interviews on my channel, are officially part of a research study. Doctors and researchers reached out to me. How amazing is that? And said that they wanted the recovery themes from these 150 plus interviews here on this channel analyzed. So Neal's story, as well as all the others on my channel, is being included in a rigorous scientific study led by the University of London. So can we just take a moment to appreciate this? How much your stories matter, our stories matter, and are going to continue to help even more people. And not only to see that recovery is possible, but to gain insights into how recovery happens and hopefully help inform the medical community to better serve the patients that they treat. So amazing. So now let's dive into Neal's story and learn as much as we can from his journey. Neal, so excited to have you here today. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're saying that you used to watch these recovery interviews, so this is an interesting sort of full circle moment.
Yeah, no, that's right. I watched this. Going back a couple of years now, as I was trying to find resources and trying to figure out really what to do next in my recovery. And you'll hear it, throughout my story. There's a few touch points where like, oh, I found that through one of your videos. I found that through one of your videos. So it's kind of a common theme, and it's exciting, a little bit surreal, but like so cool to be able to come back here and, tell my story as it's actually changed over time.
Yeah, I love this because even with my own recovery journey, one of the first doctors I saw that was helpful for me had a book on his coffee table in the waiting room that had recovery stories in it. And it was so powerful for me because I just kept envisioning what my story would be, just a printed out piece of paper in a binder. And that was so exciting for me. So yeah. I think it's nice to start, for people watching, start thinking about whether you share your story publicly or not, just to start thinking about, what will I say? What will that day look like? What will that feel like?
Yeah, for a lot of us, these journeys are years in the making. So you have a lot of time to think about, what you want to say.
Yeah. All right. So good segue into, tell us about your journey with this. How did this start?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of figure out exactly how far to go back. I'll start with a little nugget where there was a moment in time when I was studying abroad in Spain. I was 21, I think, or 22, and during college, and I had a month-long period, just really mysterious kind of pattern of I would go out and do some exercise or just activity with friends or something. During the activity itself, I'd start feeling really exhausted, and I'd have to lie down for the rest of the day. And I even found my journal from that time and everything. And I was like, this is so strange. I feel fine. But then once I do something, I'm just totally wiped out. And it was a moment I almost completely forgot because it only really lasted a month. I don't really know for sure what ended it. I went to a doctor there who gave me, this vitamin pack and penicillin, which I don't know if it had anything to do with, what I was really going through. And then days after that, I literally went on a weekend trip to Barcelona where we didn't sleep for an entire night. We were going around all day like crazy. So it's interesting to think back on that now of this happened. I was in this cycle and this pattern, and then it went away and it was gone for 7 years. And I didn't even think of it as at that time, I didn't even find the term, CFS, or it was before COVID or anything like that. But I think it's interesting just to reflect back on that of okay, well, this pattern did happen once. And then I had 7 years where I was extremely healthy. I, went to work every day. I worked out 6 days a week, seeing friends and family all the time, cooking for myself. I was pretty busy, but, I was tolerating it and feeling pretty healthy the whole time. And, then as we got into the COVID quarantine, in the first couple of weeks of being at home, I had a few symptoms that were a little unusual. I still don't know to this day if I really had COVID or not, because I couldn't even get tested at that time. but I had, a little bit of like pressure in my chest. I had some coughing. I was definitely nervous because none of us really knew what was going on at that moment. And I basically just stayed at home and recovered, and I was okay for the next few months. I was still doing like workouts in my apartment, taking care of myself. And then there was a moment in July 2020 where the only thing I can think of that was unusual before, everything else started to change was I was cooking in my kitchen and it got really, really smoky, like to the point where I had to run outside and gasp for air. And I was okay after that. Like I came back in and aired out the apartment, but I noticed that chest pressure that I had felt over the, first few weeks of the COVID quarantine come back. So at first we were looking into lung issues, but then I started to notice that pattern that I had had in Spain where, I'd work out or something like that. And then I'd have to lie on the couch for like an hour before I could get up and do anything else. And at first it was just like, okay, this happens when I exercise, but anything else is fine. But over time, I started to notice it creeping in with some other things. So, I would sit up to work all day. And by the end of the workday, I'd have to lie down for an hour before I could do anything. And then, longer drives started to do it. And so kind of built up over time over the next 6 months or so to the point where, really going out for a walk that was longer than a couple minutes would cause it. Sitting up for too long, like I said, exercise, driving, standing. So just more and more things started to trigger that really intense reaction. And, fatigue is an okay word to describe it. I would say it feels more like less like a lack of energy. And it's always felt more like my body's just kind of violently reacting to the stimulus in a way that doesn't make sense. And so it just kind of, I got boxed in further and further of like more and more things were not possible to do without feeling this. And it was really hard to know what I could handle or couldn't, and stayed that way for quite a while. I mean, I'm about 4 years into my journey now, and it's only really in the last year and a half that things have started to change. I spent the first 2.5 years, going kind of the standard route of going to my primary care doctor. We thought it was a lung thing at first because I was feeling that in my chest, and going to a pulmonologist and a cardiologist. And eventually it became clear to me that this, I wasn't formally diagnosed with either long COVID or CFS, but my rheumatologist was basically like, it's something in that family, like pick your poison as far as what you want to call it. And so it became clearer and clearer that I have to kind of treat it as one of these like chronic conditions. And it's just not just like a random lung thing or something like that. And so started going to like an integrative doctor who was very expensive and didn't really help. I was spending thousands of dollars a month on, supplements and injections and just crazy things that I'm sure work for some people, but just wasn't doing it for me. After that, I did find a little bit of certainty or clarity with the POTS diagnosis. So I actually did a tilt table test and had it formally diagnosed. And for a while, I was really running with like, okay, I'm taking care of the POTS and I'm ignoring everything else. Because if you read online a little bit, if you Google chronic fatigue syndrome, you end up in a few places online. It's a little bleak and it's a little hard to find things that really make you feel like you have a path forward. With POTS, there's quite a list of medications that people try, and it's a little bit more like, there's something to do about it. So I really latched onto that for a while, and I was trying all the different medicines that my neurologist would recommend or, that I could find out there in the world. Still didn't really help. So, at that point, I kind of flip-flopped a little bit between Eastern and Western medicine. I tried some acupuncture, other kind of herbal therapy with Chinese medicine. I saw a few naturopaths. We tried like a mold, protocol. Tried some Lyme protocols, like everything I could think of. And it really didn't do anything, to be honest. Like I've heard of some people having a little bit of benefit and then it goes away, or, very minor benefit and it's kind of not noteworthy. For the first 2.5 years, none of these things, I didn't feel any change at all from them. And it was really hard, I think, to be in that position where I'm trying so hard to find a way forward and do something. Like I was not willing to accept that like this is my life now forever and it's just never going to change. But it was really hard not to be able to influence it at all, and not see any success after trying so many different things. And so coming to about 1.5 years ago, there's a few things that I started before kind of I saw that inflection point of things changing. So one of the things I saw in one of your videos was Chris Jamieson's interview for some of his health coaching. And so started working with him. Just really going over some of the basics of diet, sleep. He has kind of the 4 pillars that he works on. And it was helpful just to talk to someone finally who'd been through it before and, could give me the benefit of his experience. I also started working with a therapist, not someone as knowledgeable about this space, but obviously certified in therapy and, all those practices specifically. But some of the things that really did help was starting Primal Trust. So this was another thing I found on your channel with Dr. Katz's interview. And I had actually tried some other brainer training programs before. I was really resistant to brainer training in general because, again, there's some really negative spaces online that you can go to related to CFS, and they'll tell you that it's a waste of money and it's a scam and they're just trying to, basically pull one over on you to take your money. And what frustrated me about hearing some people talk about it, there's a lot of copyrighted material, a lot of things are proprietary. So it felt like it was really hard for me to know who to trust at that point. Like, do I trust the people who are saying, like, just save your money and don't get scammed? Do I trust the people who are saying this could be a path forward, but I don't really know what it is? And so one of the things I'd love to talk about too, like, I can't share any proprietary secrets, but I think I can give more perspective of like, here's what to expect. It's not magic. It's not, sorcery or anything like that. It's actually very kind of down to earth and pragmatic in a lot of ways. And I think the title brainer training sometimes gives it a little bit of that like mystical air that, makes it feel less like a just, daily practice or something like that is really pragmatic and carving a path forward. But that ended up being huge for me, along with a couple other smaller things that happy to talk more about. But I'll stop there for a second because I've been talking for a while. Do you have any questions or anything?
Yeah, I know it feels that way whenever I get interviewed. Man, how long have I been talking in the hot seat? Yeah, wow, you explained that all so well. And I imagine for a lot of people watching, I know for me, it's like you're telling my story in many ways. It's amazing how many of us go through such similar things, yet feeling so alone and lost in it all. It's mind-blowing. And I'd love to hear what you said about the insight about the brain training programs, because it's addressing this component is the biggest thing that I've seen in my interviews that helps people, but I know there is a lot of resistance to it. And exactly what you're saying, when I first started hearing about it, at first I was picturing either, I don't know, like, are you just in some lab with electrodes attached to your brain? Like, or is it, you hear about programs with names like the lightning process, and I start to picture like a wizard with a wand, and it just I also was very resistant. So it'd be great to hear your insights from all of this and your experience.
Yeah, I think one thing that really resonates with me as I reflect back on it is I remember there was one night. This was before I started any of the brainer training or anything like that. But I have a friend who lives about 40 minutes away. We used to hang out every weekend before COVID, and now it's just too far for me to drive. It's too hard. So I remember trying to go to his house. It was one of those days where I'm sure, a lot of people have been through this. That, like, sometimes you veer into like, I'm not going to do anything and I just don't want to feel symptoms and I'm going to like stop doing all things that make me feel bad. And then sometimes you get really frustrated with that and you're like, I'm just going to do it and I don't care and I'm going to like go for it. And neither really works. Like, you kind of end up feeling that either way. But it was one of those nights where I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And so I got my dad's help and he was going to drive me out to my friend's house. And I remember I was trying to like lie down in the back seat and that wasn't really working. So I was trying to lean the seat back and just make it more comfortable for me. And I just had this moment where I was like, man, there are so many behaviors that I've taken on as a result of like this trauma and this illness that I'm going through that I'm going to have to unlearn. Like, it's just before going out on a drive or something, I wouldn't have even think of that as something that, could cause problems or anything. And now all of a sudden I have to make all these little adaptations and it's constantly on my mind. And at the time, I thought I was still going to find like a magic pill or, kind of something to change and take the symptoms away just in one fell swoop. And I thought that the progress or the process was going to be that all of those behaviors would then go away as the symptoms are totally gone. And then I just say like, okay, well, now I can go on this walk and I'm okay. And I'm discovering that slowly. And so I think the best way I found to describe brainer training is like the fundamental theory of it is you can actually start to unwind those protective behaviors and those things that you've adapted to before the symptoms are gone. And it actually is a means to diminish the symptoms over time by doing that. And I think, you have to put a little bit of faith in that because you'll be told in a lot of places that you have to avoid symptoms at all costs and it's not safe and you have to go out and, make sure you're avoiding or, pacing all the time to avoid them. And there's some wisdom to that. Again, you can't just go like crazy, like just do whatever you want and ignore the symptoms. It's not like that. But you can make very gradual progress towards unwinding the behaviors that kind of keep you stuck in this very closed in, environment. And that over time does have a profound impact. It's harder, right, than if the symptoms were just to go away and you were learning that everything I want to do is okay again. But it does happen. It does change over time. And that's what's been amazing about it. And I guess to use an analogy, I would think of it almost like when I was looking for a treatment that would just take all my symptoms away. It's almost kind of like, I'm walking this path and there's a giant mountain of dirt in my way. And I was looking for a stick of dynamite that would just blow up all the dirt and clear it all away. It would be gone. And I think brain retraining is a little bit more of like a shovel. So, it will help you gradually make progress and move forward with it. It's not going to take it all away at once. And again, there's amazing stories of people who've done it for like a week or something and, it's all gone. And I understand why people, like to elevate those stories because it's amazing and, inspiring to see it. But I think what's more typical is it's a very gradual kind of patient process that, again, is a lot less crazy and out there than you'd think. It's really just about learning how to approach activity and again, in a way that is getting you back to where you were before you were sick, of not even having that shadow of a doubt that it's something you could handle.
I love that pile of dirt shovel analogy. I'm definitely going to borrow that. I'm sure people will hear me say this in future videos because I think it really helps. Those visualizations help us to understand and get patience. And I've started getting the habit of saying as much as I can, remind people that rapid success does happen, but it's the exception, not the norm. So, to have realistic expectations as you're going through it and patience with the process. And, some of the biggest things that opened my eyes were just learning about and understanding how symptoms are turned on and turned off in our body. I didn't get that at all. I didn't get the role of our nervous system and our brain and all of that. And the second part of that is that we think of brain training as something that happens, in a room or in a program or an isolated recovery strategy that some people do. But the more you learn about it, you realize that we're all doing it all day, every day, our entire lives. It's just whether we know it or not, and whether we harness it and work with it and try and use that to help our recovery, or we ignore it and we keep sort of feeding those other, it's about building new automations in our brain. So, do we want to have a conscious part of that process, or do we want it just happening, to us? So it's not some mystical thing that we just do in a bubble. Okay, I'm going to do brain retraining right now. I mean, we can do focused sections of it, but it's happening all of the time.
Right. And another analogy I guess I would use is like, it almost feels like therapy is kind of like when you were in college and you had like a lecture and a lab for, let's say, like physics or something, like you're learning all the theories and then you have a, space where you're going and putting them into practice and seeing it in action. Like, that's kind of how it feels to me is therapy is, you're talking about it kind of in general and summarizing things. And then the whole process of the brain training is kind of like the lab where you're actually putting it in practice. You're doing it. You're seeing it in real life. And again, it's a lot more down to earth than I ever expected.
Yeah. Once you take away all right. So there are a few things, it sounds like, that helped you just slowly start to see progress, different programs, different things. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, around that time, it's, January 2023 or so, I started the Primal Trust program. And so, again, big aspect of it is brain training. Dr. Cat explains a lot of the background and science a lot better. But I think there's things that I did and put into practice on my own. I think another huge part of that was community, really. And it was something I resisted for a long time because, like I said, I would go into some spaces online. I hate to call anyone out, but Reddit in particular, don't go there if you're dealing with CFS. It's just, and I go there for other things like, for other interests and stuff, but it's not a good space. And so I was really resistant to online communities because of that. Because I'm like, people are just going to be negative. They're going to bring me down. And I think it did do some damage to go. I went there very early in my journey and people, I assigned a lot of authority to what people were saying there because they're like, I've been dealing with this for years and it's, this happened, or like, it seems so much more valid and legitimate than my experience. So that kept me away from connecting with other people going through it for a long time. But the great thing about the community and Primal Trust, I think there's a lot of power in face-to-face interactions. So, you meet with a group of people who are, learning the material at the same time as you, working on it together. And you can be open and honest too of like, I'm trying this thing. I don't really know if I buy it yet. Or like, we were all very candid and real. It wasn't just like, because that was the other thing too, is, it felt like to take the plunge and start these programs, like it felt like there was this huge level of buy-in you had to, make. And I found that wasn't really true. Like you have to be willing to give it a try, but you can also just see how it goes. And, and the other people on the journey with me were very like candid and we shared our doubts and our hopes and we stuck together. We're still meeting together after over a year. And it's been amazing. I think I don't think it would have gone the same or I would have kept up without that community of people working with me. And so I think that's huge. I guess also related to Primal Trust. So as I started to apply those, principles and everything, a thing that was really critical for me, and it's related but not kind of a core part of the, well, I don't want to speak one way or another on what the program is, but I'd say one thing that was really big for me as I studied the program was to start finding things that I wanted to incrementally try to increase in terms of my physical capacity. And again, there's a lot of bad rap that things like graded exercise therapy get, right? As far as it's not going to work if you say this week I'm going to do, half a mile, and next week I'm going to do a mile, and just go very aggressively and rigidly in terms of how you increase. You have to be willing to listen to your body. You have to be willing to accept setbacks and everything like that. But there is a path forward, I think, to figuring out, okay, this is what I can tolerate without feeling, triggered or symptoms or whatever you want to call it. And then I can make just the tiniest step forward that my body will not even really notice and adapt to that, and then continue to add to it slowly over time. And I had done that a little bit even before I started Primal Trust. I was, going out walking. That was like the only thing that I could find that would really influence my situation. And I got up to the point, I had a goal of walking a mile. I got up to like 9/10 of a mile. And then something happened. I had symptoms. I gave up on it, and I just tried something else instead. And I was really erratic in terms of figuring out what I was going to do. So now with Primal Trust, I started back on that. At that point, I was only walking to the corner of my block. And I literally added one house at a time every few days. Sometimes it was more than a week in between, incrementing it. But over time, it went from, a walk that was probably 1/10 of a mile to walking a mile. Now I do a mile every day, and it doesn't even feel like it's a push or something that I'm nervous about doing. It feels like I can take for granted that my body's going to be able to tolerate it. So it really does add up over time. And that's been the approach as I've implemented the techniques and everything of Primal Trust and worked with the community and really kind of explored some of the items in there. On the side, I've been following that very gradual, incremental way forward, not just with walking, but with sitting up, standing up, driving. Driving's my big focus now. So I'm up to about half an hour. I was at 0 minutes basically in the car at one point. So I still got, ways to go on my journey, but I'm so excited to see how much it can change with all of that, gradual progress.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up graded exercise therapy. I know it's a taboo term in our community, and, for a lot of reasons, for good reason, because when it's done rigidly, like you said, the more people I talk to, the more I'm understanding because we need to slowly increase our activity, right? We need to slowly start bringing things back into our life and eliminating that fear around walking, around driving, slowly with flexibility and, go at your own pace. And essentially graded exercise therapy, if used in that way, is what it is. It's comparable to treatment for phobias, like gradual re-exposure therapy. It's just slowly okay, I can sit up. It's okay. That doesn't equal danger. It's not going to make me sick. Okay, I can stand up. I can walk around. Okay, maybe next week I can walk to the end of the block and back, or whatever your schedule is. That might be too aggressive for some people. That might be too slow for others. But it is about just slowly changing those pathways in the brain, because we've really become conditioned and trained ourselves to be experts at being scared of everything. And it's an automatic trigger. Any movement, any driving, anything going to make me feel sick. Don't do it. Danger, danger, danger. So I think it's an important conversation about the graded exercise therapy, that we used to think of it as about exercise, I think, like conditioning our body and building up strength, that it's really about conditioning our mind and our nervous system. So if done in the right way, for a lot of people, it seems to be very effective. Yeah,
I agree. And I think one mistake I made earlier on too was I went out for a walk. I remember, longer than I had been walking, and I was monitoring my thoughts, and I was like, I'm so confident this is going to go okay. And then I still had symptoms after, and I was like, well, this theory just doesn't make sense, because I was good. I didn't feel fearful or anything on the walk, but it can really be on a deeper level in terms of how you perceive it. So I think that's just going back to the emphasis of gradual progress really changing over time. It's not a matter of flipping a switch and saying, I'm going to just believe that I can do this now, and all of a sudden you do it without symptoms. There's a reason why you ended up where you did in terms of the response, but gradually over time, you really can change it. So
it's not a switch that we flip. We don't, unfortunately, because that can be the frustrating piece. Okay, I understand it now. I get it. But why am I still getting symptoms? Because we can change things in our conscious awareness very quickly. But in our unconscious, everything that's happening, it takes time to shift, like your shovel and the dirt on the road.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not dynamite. It's you chip away at it over time and just.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So what else on your journey has been helpful for you?
Yeah. So a couple other things. Around the same time I started Primal Trust, I started working with a craniosacral therapist. And it's been a really interesting process. We've met, once a week or every other week. And I almost think of it, there's a lot that he's perceptive to that I don't perceive quite as like acutely, I guess, not being someone who works in that field. But I've noticed just how adjacent it is and how much it aligns with what I'm trying to do in Primal Trust. Because if you're thinking about calming your nervous system down, getting to a point where your body can get into more of a healing state, it's almost kind of like an assisted approach to doing that, as you work with a very gentle form of body therapy like that. I've had issues with chronic pain in the past, and massage was huge for me. So I know it's something that works well for my body, but this was a totally different approach to it. It's so gentle and there's so little movement that it's one of those things where it's hard to, know on the surface what's really happening. But the more and more I reconciled it with being, like I say, kind of like an assisted meditation practice or something like that to get your body in that state, the more it's just felt really complementary to everything I've been doing outside of it. And then the other thing that was a big deal for me, and still is it's called Epipharyngeal Abrasive Therapy. And I had come across it in my earlier chapter, I would say, of like looking for anything and everything that was going to help me. And I'd read a little bit. There's studies about, clinics in Japan doing it. And, and it looked promising, but there was no one in America that does it. So I kind of let it go for a little while. One of my mom's friends ended up bringing it up, and I looked into it again. And at that point I was doing Primal Trust, and I was trying not to be so erratic in terms of try this thing. Like I was trying to focus my energy and attention on, doing the walk or whatever it was I was working on at that time. But there was something about epipharyngeal abrasive therapy that really stood out to me, because basically it involves taking a swab and abrading or, kind of rubbing against this area in the back of your nose, the nasopharynx area where your nose meets your throat. And that area for me has always, like, I've had this sensation that always bubbles up there right before all my other symptoms come on. So it kind of feels like a tingling. I've called it almost like a poison gas sensation. But for me, once that starts, I know that, I've kind of crossed the line and other things are going to happen. So there was something just very intuitive to me about, I'm not going to try every single treatment I come across anymore, but this one does feel like my body's telling me that it's relevant. And the hard part was, only doctors in Japan really know how to do it. I tried reaching out to every single doctor I could and find someone to do it here. But I did find a video of a person from Japan who had been trained to do it at home at the clinic they went to. So the doctor would basically do it for them in clinic, and then they'd go home and do some homework where they're doing the home practice. So I learned the home practice from her. I bought some swabs online and some saline to dip them in, and I learned how to do it. And if you've ever taken like a flu test or a COVID test and you know how deep the swab needs to go, it's not easy at first. I told myself the first time, like, if I just get it in an inch, that's okay. Like, I had to do that incremental, training with this even, but now I can get it back really easily and do it. And the theory behind it, again, the studies are going to explain it better than I do, but it's, I think, meant to be antiseptic in a way of cleaning out any virus or infection that is like, inhabiting that space in the nasal cavity. But it's also really interesting because the vagus nerve innervates that spot in a really big way. So it's also another form of vagus nerve stimulation. And there's just so many ties to the vagus nerve and all of the, dysautonomia and everything that I experienced. So it just seemed really right for me. And again, none of these things has been a magic wand. It's all been very gradual and slow. But I will say I started that in August of last year, and I had some major milestones in the second part of 2023. I was able to go out for Halloween for the first time in a few years, which I absolutely love. I started going out to dinner again. I had my first meal in a restaurant in like November, which, in like 4 years or so, which was amazing. So, it's still been gradual. To this day, I'm still working on a lot of these things, but I do think it's helped in the sense that, it took me from just having the walking be the progress that I was making to really opening up my world to all these other things that I can gradually and slowly incorporate until, they just become second nature like they used to be.
Wow, this is quite the journey you've been on. You have learned a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing the health experts we come out as once, we come through the other end of this, or even when we're partway through it. You're learning at such a rapid rate. You have to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And I always found that super challenging about the whole thing is like, I'm not at my full capacity when I'm dealing with these symptoms and everything. And yet I have to like become a medical expert at the same time and complete this extraordinary level of learning that's, above and beyond what even a normal healthy person would, be capable of. So it's a tall order for sure.
So were there other things that contributed to your recovery, or is this kind of the main things that got you where you are now?
I think that's the group. I'd say again that working with Chris having a one-on-one coach was great. Having a therapist was really good. Primal Trust and everything that entailed with the community and the practices, the craniosacral therapy and the EAT or epipharyngeal abrasive therapy. And I don't know what breakdown of what did what. Like it's hard to be super scientific about. If I took one of those things out of the mix, would it be totally different or would it be the same? I don't know, but I think it takes a village in situations like this. And so I've kind of found my village and we're moving forward together and it's working. So yeah, I think that's the group for me. There's definitely a lot of insight that's come from Primal Trust and just from my own experiences, reflecting on what I wish I had known at the beginning and what's been helpful all along. So things that are not necessarily treatments or interventions, but I think are really helpful to keep you going on the journey. So one of those pieces of advice that I would give is finding a source of joy in your day to day. And I know, again, that sounds very like basic or like, how's that ever going to cure this medical issue that's going on? But it does, I think, relate to that idea that we're talking about of getting rid of that fear and decreasing the stakes of when you're trying something new and scary. So I actually got a Nintendo Switch in like 2022, right before I started Primal Trust. And I used to play games all the time as a kid, and I kind of stopped for like 15 years. And getting that game, like I didn't think it was going to be that big an impact in my life, but it was so helpful. I found this game that I loved called Persona 5, and you could play it for like hundreds of hours. And so I had something to look forward to that I could do, whether or not I had symptoms that day, regardless of how I felt, I knew I could wake up and play that game. And it was huge because if I was going to go out, and take a walk that day, for example, and take a risk on what I was trying, I would know in the back of my head, even if the worst case scenario happens and I get symptoms from this, I could play Persona 5 the next day and I'm still going to have a good time and I have something to look forward to. So it sounds like a small thing, but it really is like finding some kind of joy that is unconditional of like, I know there's things we all want to be doing and love to do when we feel great, but if you can find something that can be there with you unconditionally and just decrease the severity of how upsetting it is when, you have a setback, I think that's huge. The other thing I'd say, I haven't mentioned this yet, but I actually kept working the entire time I was, going through this journey, which is a little bit unusual. I was very lucky to have a job that I could do from my bed. So my company, went remote for COVID and then never really ended up going back to full-time in person. And I was lucky in that sense, and also lucky in the sense that I didn't really get a lot of the mental effects of long COVID or CFS that a lot of people get. I didn't have brain fog or, I could do pretty challenging mental work and not have reactions to it. And I think it just all falls into the theme similar to the walk and finding success there is you have to look for anything like that where, it's a terrible situation you've ended up in, but are there any threads of, something you can influence or some gift you've been given that, I don't know why I'm able to do this and not that, but it's working for me, and just keep running with it. I think I'm really glad in hindsight, like there were times when I was like, should I stop working? Is this part of the problem? Am I, causing stress? And then like my physical state's worse because of work. And I'm sure it contributed stress, but I also do believe if I had stopped working, that would have been another mountain to climb as far as, having to incrementally get back to it. And I would have kind of closed myself in further. I wouldn't have had as much interaction with the outside world either. And I think it's different for every person. For some people, working isn't right. I'm not saying everyone should while they're sick, but I think you just have to really look at what's working for you and not shy away from those things. There may only be like one or two things that are really like these amazing threads or path forward, and you just have to really find those and run with them. And I think the last thing I'd say that was helpful when I was thinking about pacing is, I think most people think of pacing as like, don't exceed this level of activity, but I think you also have to make sure that you like rise to that level of activity too. Don't go far below what you can do, because then you're giving up ground you don't really need to be. And you really need to find that balance of not always pushing, not always resting, finding an amount you can do every single day, and then very steadily increase it like we're talking about. I found amazing success with, I've been doing these dynamic yoga poses, and I started doing 3 reps of each a day. So very simple. My body could tolerate it from the get-go. The goal was to get to 21 reps, and I literally increased it like once every couple of weeks. And after a year, I'm at 21, and I'm starting to do like push-ups and things that are a little harder now. And I actually see a path forward for this turning into like a full-fledged workout, like I used to do in the gym. So be willing to accept that kind of slow progress. It's almost like you're sneaking this change past your body, and it's a change so small you barely even notice it, but it does add up over time. And I think that's the biggest learning is don't don't shy away from something that feels small and feels like it couldn't possibly amount to anything in the long term. It really does add up over time in ways that you can't imagine.
Yeah. Wow. I am on the edge of my seat. I am soaking up everything you say. You explain things so incredibly well. I've never heard anything explained that well. I think that's brilliant. Just really appreciate everything you're sharing. So I'm curious, where are you at now with things, and what do you see moving forward for this next phase for yourself?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm still on my journey. I'm not, totally in the promised land or anything as far as like not having any symptoms for anything, but it is in such a different place since I've been able to go out, see people I haven't seen in 4 years. Like, it just feels like, when I mentioned at the beginning, the hardest part of trying all these things and not having them work was like all this time was passing and there wasn't any momentum. There wasn't any progress forward. And I think, when you're sick for a couple of weeks, you're like, I just want it to be better next week. But after you go through it for a while, you get to the point where even making gradual, slow progress, you really value. And so that's where I am now is, like I said, I'm going out, I'm sitting up, I'm driving. There's more and more I want to do. I want to be able to travel and, see people even further away and eat in restaurants that are far from my home and things like that. And I have so much more confidence now that I'm going to get there. But one of the things I've really been able to hone in over the last year or so are, what my values are and what the goals look like in my life. And through a lot of inquiry and process, I've kind of worked out like my 5 main values are intellectual challenge, wonder, justice, connection, and health. And those all mean kind of different things to me. But intellectual challenge is something I get through my work, which is great. It's stimulating in that sense. Wonder is kind of the really big one that sums up a lot of the creativity and play and things I care about. And it makes me think of like being a kid and going out for Halloween or something and trick-or-treating. And there's all this mystery of like, what could be there? Are there ghosts out on this night and everything? And I love experiencing that. And I love creating it for other people. So I'm going all in. I started in March this year, creating my Halloween display for October. So it's going to be epic. And I'm really excited to kind of bring my values to life in that way. And then, connection again, like friendship and reaching out and people that I haven't seen in a while. The health piece, a little bit self-explanatory, but really bringing the workout side kind of back into my life. The last one I want to speak on is that justice piece. And for me, that is just like in the context of what, I've observed here and everything, figuring out what's just not right about the way that this goes for people and trying to basically be a resource that I wish I had earlier on in the journey. And I'm still, in the process of formulating exactly how this is going to go, but I'm excited to kick it off soon, which I really just want to help people. No formal program, no, charge or anything. I want to do it for free. But I really just want to be almost kind of like in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a sponsor who has been through it before and helps people who are newly down the path kind of share the benefit of their wisdom and just talk through, this is how it went for me. And, here's some of my experience. I want to start doing that for other people. And I feel very strongly about offering it for free just because it's hard when you're stuck and you don't know where to turn. And I understand, people need to charge for their services and they've done great work to build these programs. So I don't fault anyone for any of that. But I just know that there's a level of trust and safety in knowing that someone is willing to help you without getting anything out of it. And I know I could have used that at the time. And that, something about your channel for sure that I love too is like so much information I could get access to just by tuning in and watching. So anyway, that's a big goal of mine to really sketch out how that's going to look over the next few years. But it's not going to be a replacement for like a brain training program or anything like that. There's still amazing value that they offer. But just being that person who's willing to be there and go on the journey with you. So I can't wait to start reaching out to people and helping that way.
Oh my goodness. I'd be curious to touch base with you in a couple months.
Yeah.
As people watching, I'll put, links in the video description. He's got a YouTube channel where he shares some information on this. I feel like you're going to get overloaded with this CFS sponsor offer.
Yeah. How to avoid it turning into like, it's just one of me, and trying to make sure I can actually get around to people. But,
right.
But I'm excited. I just can't wait to get out and start helping. So.
That's amazing. Absolutely incredible. Neal, this has been absolutely brilliant. Every word you shared has been gold. I know people will appreciate this so much. You explain things so well and just so concisely and just such great insights from all of this. I know this is going to mean the world to people to have seen this video. So thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a meaningful moment in my journey. And if it helps anyone, that's just so much better. So thanks again. And for all the work you've done all along. I mean, I wouldn't be here right now talking to you if it weren't for all the other interviews you've done before. So I'm so happy that, this can be a part of my journey too.
And I'm just so happy for you that you've made it this far and you've made so much progress and you just seem to be in a really good place in your life, and it looks like your future is very bright. So I'm very happy for you.
I agree.
I'm sorry you had to go through this. I know it's a nightmare journey for virtually everyone, but seems like you've pulled a lot of good from it and they're in a good place, which is amazing. Yeah, and just take a moment, like I do at the end of videos, just to send a thank you out to one of our channel members. So thank you to Francisca Osmer. I hope I said your name right. Thanks for joining the channel. I appreciate the support. And for those of you watching, if you're interested in learning more about the Primal Trust program that Neal has been talking about, I interviewed the founder of the program, Dr. Kat King. So I'll link that video up here. It's a really great interview. She shares, a bit about what the program is and just a lot of the insights that she has about recovery and actionable things that you can consider for your own journey. So yeah, thank you again, Neal. Thanks to those of you watching. Big hugs to all of you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, and I hope to see you in this next one with Dr. King.